The auctioneer's voice carried across the lot like something mechanical. Flat. Practiced. He had done this before, and would do it again before the week was out. It was October 1961, outside Wickenburg, Arizona, a town where the desert comes right up to the edge of the pavement, where the creosote holds the smell of rain for days after the last drop, and where men who work the land do not say much and mean all of it. The Harlan place sat on 43 acres of caliche and hard grass, with a windmill that had been turning since 1929 and a barn that had not needed painting and had not gotten it. And nobody in Wickenburg thought anything less of the family for that. Margaret Harlan stood at the edge of her own property line with her arms. She was 51 years old. Her husband, Clyde Harlan, had died 14 months before from a coronary. He'd been out in the East Field when it happened, and the men who found him said the fencing pliers were still in his hand. Before that, Clyde had run cattle on this land for 22 years. Before the cattle, his father had run a small copper operation from the same acreage. The Harlan name had been on the Wickenburg County Assessor's roll without interruption since 1919. 42 years of taxes paid, water rights negotiated, boundary disputes settled quietly and without lawyers. When Clyde died, the note on the property came due. A variable rate instrument, originated in 1954, tied to a Phoenix lending institution that had itself been acquired by a larger concern out of. The new concern sent a man named Whitfield to handle the accounts in Maricopa County. Whitfield drove a clean tan Chevrolet. He wore a short-sleeved dress shirt. He had a leather folder on his seat, and he was polite about everything. The balance owed was $4,100. Margaret had $980 in the bank, and a son, Danny, who was 19 and working a feedlot in Prescott for $40 a week. She had written 3 letters to the Dallas concern. 2 had been answered with form correspondence. The third had not been answered at all. The foreclosure had been filed in April. By October, everything was in order. The auction had been scheduled, posted, and this morning it had begun. Wickenburg was a small town. The neighbors had come. The Reinhold family was there, and the Gutierrez brothers, and 2 men from the feed store whose names Margaret didn't know well. The auctioneer was from Whitfield. Stood at the edge of the lot with his folder under his arm, watching the proceedings the way a man watches a train schedule, not interested in the train itself, only in whether it is running on time. The bidding had opened at $3,200 and gone up twice in the first 3 minutes. Margaret did not move from the property line. She had watched the same windmill turn for 22 years. It turned now. The morning light was hard and flat off the desert, the way it gets in October when the summer heat has broken, but the sun still has something left to say. Nobody came to stand next to her. At the far edge of the lot, leaning against the passenger door of a dusty Ford pickup with Arizona plates, was a large man in a canvas workshirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms. He had a battered Stetson pulled low against the morning light. He had driven out from a location shoot near Prescott the night before and stopped at the motor court on Route 60 for 6 hours of sleep. He had needed coffee and a quiet road before the crew woke up, and this was the road he had found. He was watching the auctioneer. He was watching Margaret Harlan. He had not moved in. Have you ever watched something happen to a person and felt the room decide not to see it? Drop your state in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches. The auctioneer called 6,000 once the man in the canvas shirt set his coffee cup on the hood. He pushed off from the door with one shoulder and walked across the lot the way he walked every set he had ever worked on, no particular hurry. Weight in the heels, the hat still pulled low, and he walked to where Whitfield was standing with the leather. The auctioneer called 6,000 twice. The man stopped in front of Whitfield. He said, "What does she owe?" Not a question. The way it was spoken made it something else. Whitfield looked at him. It took a moment, and then it took another moment. He said, "I'm sorry. IRU, what does she owe on the note?" Whitfield opened. His hands moved with the efficiency of a man who had done this before, and knew that unusual situations resolved faster when you did not make them more unusual than they had to be. He said, "The outstanding balance is $4,100. Plus the filing fees, that's $4,200, and stop the auction." Whitfield said, "Sir, the proceedings are. Stop the auction." Still quiet, still without any heat in it. "I am going to give you a check for $4,200, and you are going to give her back her deed, and we are both going to be through with this before the coffee gets cold. Is there a problem with that arrangement?" The auctioneer had stopped calling. Whitfield looked at the folder. He looked at the man. He looked at the folder again. He said, "No, sir. There isn't." The man turned and walked back to the truck. He got a checkbook from the glove box. He wrote the check on the hood, leaning forward, the pen moving slowly and deliberately. He tore it out and walked it back to Whitfield and did not watch Whitfield take it. He walked to where Margaret Harlan was standing at the property line. She had not moved. Her face didn't. He stopped a few feet from her, and he took off the hat and held it in both hands, which was how he had been taught to speak to women, and he said, "Mrs. Harlan, I have a problem that you can solve for me if you're willing." She looked at him. She knew who he was now. Half of Wickenburg knew by that point. He said, "I've been working a location out near Prescott for 3 weeks, and my cook, and I need someone who knows this country and knows how to feed 12 men at 5 in the morning. That's a 3-week job if you want it. What I'm paying you would cover what I just paid out, so the math works out even. And I'd be obliged." Margaret Harlan looked at him for a long time. She said, "Mister, I've been cooking for large groups since I was 16 years old." He said, "Then we've got a deal." He put the hat back on. "I'll have somebody come by at 4:30 tomorrow." He walked to the truck. He finished the coffee. He drove back toward Route 60, and the desert came back up to the edge of the pavement, and the windmill turned in the wind behind. What happened to the Harlan place after October 1961 is not a short story. Margaret cooked for the crew that 3 weeks and was paid $800, which was more than the job was worth by any honest accounting, and she knew it. She did not say so. She took the money and paid the tax bill that had also been outstanding and had $300 left when the month was done. She farmed the 43 acres herself that first spring. Danny came back from Prescott in February. He had heard what had happened from a man at the feedlot who had heard from a man in Wickenburg. And he came back because it seemed like the right. He was 19 years old and had never operated a combine, and learned it that spring from a neighbor named Reinhold, who had been one of the people standing in the lot that morning. Margaret farmed that land for 19 more years. She learned the windmill, the whole greasy top of it, the gears and the pump rod, because there was no one else to learn it. And Danny eventually took the operation over in 1978, by which point the 43 acres had been expanded to 61 through a land purchase from the Gutierrez brothers when they relocated to Tucson. Danny Harlan farmed that land until 2003. 42 years on the same acreage that his father and grandfather had worked before him. He had 2 daughters. Both of them went to the University of Arizona. The older one, Carolyn, became a soil scientist and spent 30 years working on irrigation and drought resistance research for the Arizona Water Resources Institute. She has said in interviews that she grew up watching her mother learn a windmill from the ground up, and that this is why she went into water. The younger daughter teaches 4th grade. The deed to the Harlan property, the original deed, restored after October 1961, hung framed on the kitchen wall of the farmhouse for 40 years. Margaret's handwriting in the margin, where she had noted the date and the amount. October 14th, 1961, $4,200. The frame was nothing special. The glass had a crack in the lower right corner from when it had been bumped years before, and nobody ever replaced the glass because it wasn't the kind of thing that needed replacing. When Margaret died in 1993, Danny left it where it was. The afternoon light comes through the kitchen window in October and moves across that frame the way it always has, and the windmill turns in the yard. And the 43 acres sit the way desert land sits, patient and specific, and not particularly impressed by the past. John Wayne never spoke of what happened at the Harlan lot that morning. Not to the director. Not to the crew when he came back to the location that afternoon. Not in any interview given in the 18 years he had left to live. Not in any letter that anybody has ever turned up. There is a kind of man who notices the people a room has decided not to see, who stops at a property line because something about a woman standing alone at the edge of her own land, watching 42 years come apart, is a thing that simply cannot be walked past. Not because it is dramatic. Because it is not. The measure of a man is not what he does when the room is watching. It is what he does on a Tuesday morning, on a road he didn't plan to be on. With a check he didn't, for a woman whose name he would not have known by nightfall. If this story found you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.